My name's Izzy Trubshaw, and I am a reporter for the Guildford Dragon. Today I'm here with Sir Jeremy Hunt, who is a local MP for the Godalming and Ash constituency. Thank you very much for speaking to
It's a
me
pleasure.
today. So I read your book, and I found it, as I was saying, extremely accessible, really well written, really enjoyed it. One main theme that I saw throughout the book was this idea that both in the UK, but citizens globally also are experiencing this sort of self-doubt and lacking confidence and trust towards democracy. So we're sort of going towards autocratic regimes and um, changing the whole political systems globally. So my first question is, what role does local democracy play in rebuilding that trust and that democratic value that you agree we should have in the UK and also globally?
Well, I think it can play a huge role. And I think the first thing to say is that if we'd been having this discussion 10 years ago and said, what is the defining issue of the 21st century going to be? We'd have probably said climate change. Is the planet going to survive? Are we going to take the decisions necessary? And we've still got a lot to do on climate change, but global emissions are coming down. And I think that we now have to contend with something else, which is the global struggle between autocracy and democracy, which we didn't really notice was starting to happen a decade ago. But now you've got countries like China and Russia that are very clear that they think their systems are better. I mean, when I first started going to China, Chinese leaders would say, one day we'll be like you, but they don't say that now. They think their systems are better. And, we happen to be having this interview on the day of the local elections when the voters have given a real drubbing, not just to Labour, but also it's been a tough night for the Conservatives. And one of the reasons for the frustration with the two big parties is a feeling that whoever we send to Westminster, they just don't seem able to solve the big problems we face. And without getting into whether that's fair or not, and obviously I have my views having been in the government for more than a decade, I think we have to accept that that is what people feel. And one of the reasons is, this is a very long way of answering your question, Izzy, but one of the reasons is because it takes so damn long to fix things locally. I mean, I'll give you an example. This morning, I was at Ashvale Station, where to get onto the mainline train to London, you have to walk up. It's the equivalent of about 3 stories of stairs. And people in Ash have been wanting a lift there for decades. And I went along this morning, and basically, if all goes to plan, we will have this lift built in 2.5 years' time.
Oh my goodness.
And really, and I'm very grateful to Network Rail, and I'm very grateful to the Labour government for agreeing to do it. It's one of only 10 projects. It's going to cost potentially about £10 million. How ridiculous. It shouldn't be anything to do with the MP at all. Basically the community in Ash should be able to agree this with Network Rail. If this was China, that lift would be put in probably in a month. And yet it's taking so long. And I think it is because we have emasculated local democracy, and you just can't get things done in at a local level. And that's why people really depend on their MPs. But really and truthfully, we've centralized power in Westminster. And every other country in the world, they will have an elected mayor in somewhere like Godalming or someone like Ash or someone like Guildford, who would have a 4-year term, and then they would be able to make things happen. But Network Rail, they're not really that interested in what local councillors say. It has to be the MP, it has to be the Secretary of State, and that's why things take too long, and that's why people get depressed.
So do you think that we've just had these elections and this political reorganisation locally, do you think that this is going to have a positive impact on, as I say, rebuilding this trust in local democracy, and also for the people to think that their voices will be heard?
No, because I think the system is broken. I mean, what these local elections were is voters using the ballot box in a local election to give national parties a kicking. So they weren't really about making things better in the local area in many cases. And that's such a tragedy because, you know, people in Guildford, people in Godalming, they're passionate about their area. I mean, we all care about the area. I get personally really furious about the amount of litter dropped on country lanes because I think it's so beautiful. And why are we polluting it with all this litter? But, you know, problems like that, which are the responsibility of local councils, that wasn't on people's minds when they went to the ballots yesterday. It was, I'm fed up with Labour, sometimes I'm fed up with the Conservatives, sometimes I'm fed up with the Liberal Democrats, and therefore I'm going to vote for Reform or Green just to show these parties that I'm fed up. And that is, you know, local democracy gone very badly wrong.
So you're saying that in your own constituency as well, you're seeing a lot of this loss of confidence.
Yes, and I think that if on the other hand, yesterday, in a parallel world, voters have been going to the polls to elect a mayor of Godalming for 4 years who had real power to spend, to tax, to borrow, that would have really mattered for Godalming. You'd have had a much higher turnout, and people would have voted on Godalming issues. They wouldn't have been voting on the Labour government in Westminster. And that way, we'd have had properly healthy local democratic process. And yes, I think that would restore confidence. I think the other thing that would restore confidence is if politicians actually asked voters what they think more often. You know, in Switzerland, they have a very robust tradition of direct democracy where every year there will be dozens of referendums in areas like Guildford or Godalming on local issues, sometimes on national issues. Now, the thing about a referendum is it's basically saying to people, look, on these issues, we're going to ask you what you think, give you a say. And I think as long as there's proper deliberation around referendums, it's a very good way of putting power in people's hands. And in Switzerland, you know, the trust in politicians and the government is about 3 times higher than it is here, because the politicians are a bit more humble and they ask the people. Now, the counter argument is the Brexit referendum, the Scottish independence referendum were enormously divisive. I don't think the way we do referendums here is very good. And we need to think about that. But they do them pretty effectively in Switzerland. And it's, by the way, it's not just got more confidence in its elected politicians, it's a massively wealthier country. And it's very stable and very secure.
Right. So what, as a local MP, how are you, I know you've done a lot of campaigning for example, green spaces, and you've done a lot of campaigning all around the constituency, but what is your approach into really trying to encourage the local people to trust you and you as the representative voice for them? How do you go about doing that?
Well, I would say this: in a general election, they are voting partly because they do know that because of our centralised systems, an effective, conscientious MP can help make the area better. But they're also voting because of who they want to be Prime Minister and the big national issues. So it's not all about local issues, it's a mixture, and it varies from constituency to constituency. My approach here is to try to be honest with people about what I can change and what I can't change. I find that sometimes, this morning I had 3 meetings with Network Rail on 3 different rail issues. And I generally find I have about a 50% hit rate. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I do tell people that. I'm telling you that now, because Network Rail don't have to listen to me. They do have to listen to the Secretary of State for Transport. But a constituency MP does have some influence and can raise issues in the House of Commons. So I try to be honest about what I can do and what I can't do. And I try to pick issues where I think I can make a difference. So campaigning to get the Surrey Hills turned into a national park, mean, that's a lifetime's work, but I think it could happen. We've got the AONB expanded for the first time in 50 years. That's just waiting on the Secretary of State's desk, and fingers crossed we'll get that. That would be brilliant for the Surrey Hills, first expansion, pretty much in our lifetimes. I, when I was responsible for Farnham, I pushed through a big transformation of the town centre to try and stop it being so dominated by traffic, because it's so beautiful, but there's just so much traffic there. So I think part of it is, and another big one I'm focusing on at the moment is mobile phone signals, where across a lot of my patch, they're not very good. And that's very frustrating if you're, in Cranley or Godalming and you're trying to pay for your car parking charge, but you can't get a signal to get the app up on your phone. So those are things where, a bit of lobbying by an MP can make a difference. I'm less able to help in other areas, and so I suppose part of it is a judgment as to where you think you might be able to make a difference.
Yeah. I have a question about the difference between how you deal with issues on a local level compared to a national level.
Well, things have probably changed in that respect, because when I was Chancellor, my Treasury officials said they had literally never had a Chancellor before who spent so much time in his constituency and focused on local issues. And that was partly because most of my predecessors, if not all my predecessors, had very safe seats, and my seat was a very marginal seat, and I could see there was an election coming and I was going to have to fight very hard to hold it. And so I did do a lot of local campaigning alongside my ministerial duties. But in fairness, I've always felt my constituency as a marginal seat, because when I became the parliamentary candidate 20 years ago, the majority was less than 1,000. And I've always treated it as vulnerable. And what I found is, though, that when you get involved in local issues, you learn a lot of things that are really helpful for your ministerial duties. So, this morning I spoke to someone who has mental health difficulties and has been finding it very hard to get the support she needs from the NHS. Well, those kind of conversations were very useful for me ahead of the time that I became health secretary. And when I was sitting down with all these doctors at the top of the NHS who would say to me, since you became health secretary, we're doing 1 million more consultations for people with mental health challenges than we were doing before, I would say, well, it's clearly not enough. Sounds good, doesn't it? But it's clearly not enough, because there are some people who are just waiting too long. So I actually think it's, maybe to use a cliche, but it's talking to your customers. It's finding out what people feel, and it's discovering where there are problems in the system. I think that, to be a little bit political for a moment, if Rachel Reeves had spoken to a few more farmers, she wouldn't have introduced the family farm tax, which is going to force lots of farmers to sell up rather than pass on their farm to their children and their grandchildren as they want to do. So I think it's actually a strength of our system that MPs have to be locally engaged. And now we're in a very competitive climate where there aren't really any safe seats anywhere. So I think what I was going through as Chancellor, I suspect every cabinet minister in the Labour cabinet will be spending a lot of time in their constituencies.
Yeah. So I know that one issue that you spoke about in your book, in your local constituency, is the concern of migration concerns. I know that in Ash, in particular, there's quite a big Gurkha community. How do you have you had any members of the local public come to you with these concerns, and how do you approach that issue when you do have a large community of migrants?
Absolutely. I mean, I spent 8 weeks knocking on doors continuously in the general election campaign, and I was talking to, for a lot of the time, people who were considering whether they should leave the Conservatives and vote Reform. And immigration was generally the top concern on their mind. And that was really why I wrote that chapter, because I'm worried that unless we control migration properly, and I'm speaking as someone who's married to an immigrant who strongly believes that it's one of the things that's made our country the remarkable country it is, that we've been open to the brightest and best talent from all over the world for centuries. But I think we will lose the social consent to do that unless we control migration. And I think we have to ask ourselves why. I mean, you could not have had a prime minister more determined than Rishi Sunak to stop the boats. And that Conservative government passed 3 acts of parliament. 3. So the majority of MPs who wanted to do it, 3 acts of parliament, and it was still stopped in the courts. And if you're asking why voters feel disillusioned with democracy, whatever your own views are on migration, it's a stunning example of the failure of our political system. I mean, Rishi Sunak was meeting twice a week. He could not. I mean, he's a very capable, competent, determined guy, and even he wasn't able to do it. And that's why I think there are some things that really need fixing in the plumbing of our democracy.
Yeah, another concern that you brought up was about global trade and needing to encourage global trade. Again, linking that back to local communities, local industries. How would you address a concern regarding encouraging local industries and local businesses in the face of global trade? And
well, when Britain removed all our trade barriers in the at the time of the repeal of the Corn Laws, I mean, we were the first country in the world, I think it was 1839, to unilaterally remove all our trade barriers. We actually then very soon became by far the most prosperous country in the world. So I think it is fundamentally a misunderstanding to say that the cause of poverty is globalization. The cause of poverty is that we haven't been as good as we need to be at spreading the benefits of globalization evenly around the country. And so you don't hear too many people complaining about globalization in Surrey, because Surrey is a very prosperous county and lots of people work in London. But you would hear that in the northeast and the northwest, where people have seen manufacturing industries decline. And I bring it back to local democracy. I think the way that the trick we've missed are, there hasn't been a government in recent living memory that hasn't wanted to try and reduce the gap between north and south. But we've always done it with sort of slugs of money from the Treasury, or a new infrastructure project, or a new bridge. Actually, what we should be doing is giving those areas the power to sort out their own problems. Andy Burnham is the mayor of Manchester. He's pretty capable. He's probably responsible for the biggest city in the Western world that isn't actually able to raise money for big transport projects, but has to go begging to the Treasury in London for the money he needs. And that's the thing I think we've got missing.
Oh, Chris, one last question. This is their last question, ending question. So in your book, there was near the end one quote that I really liked what you said. You said, politicians rarely regret being too radical, but usually wish they'd done more with their power when they had it. And I was just wondering whether that's how you feel about yourself, both on a local level and also on a national level.
Definitely. On a local level, I think there's lots of things that I've done. As I say, my frustration is more that locally elected councillors aren't able to solve those problems themselves. But on a national level, for sure, I was very proud to reduce the number of baby deaths in the NHS when I was health secretary, which went down by about 3 a day. But did I put in place the fundamental structural reforms that mean the NHS can face the future with confidence? I don't think I did. And I wish I had done that. I wish I'd had the political support to do it, which I don't think I would have had, even if I'd wanted to. When I was Chancellor, I was only there for a couple of years. did I put in place big plans to reform welfare? Well, not as big as I would have liked.
Yeah.
And, we still have a system where in London, if you get the three main benefits and live in a one-bedroom flat, you'll get £46,000 a year compared to £22,000 after tax on the national living wage. It's crazy. And so, yes, I would like to be more radical and like to have been. And I think the most important bit of advice I would give to my successors is do your big radical things in your first 6 months. Because the biggest difference between business and politics, in business, you can be chief executive of British Airways for a couple of years, and then you say, now this is my big plan to make it the best airline in the world. And it's probably quite wise to have waited a bit. You learn the ropes. In politics, you don't have that time, as Keir Starmer is finding out. He messed around for a couple of years, and now voters are punishing him very, very heavily. Yeah. He should have got on with some really big and radical reforms right at the start. And then he would be able to say to people genuinely, look, this is a work in progress, let me finish the job. So I think in politics, you have to do your big things really, really early.
I suppose the issue is that a lot of these reforms that are put in place have long-term benefits, and so.
But people know that.
People know that,
and you have to. And I think if they feel you've been brave, they will give you the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Not at all, Izzy.